what I like to add whenever I talk about EEG, because we've become accustomed to thinking of EEG as, okay, it's the gold standard for sleep staging, right? But you have to understand that EEG itself is just an oversimplification. It's kind of it is a simplification of what is happening in the brain, because they're more or less reliable, nice quantitative. What's EEG is basically the electrical patterns of your brain, right? So you can wear these devices in a lab and they'll tell you quite precisely, because electricity is easy to measure, what the patterns are. But those patterns are just a super oversimplification.
Hi, it's Jeremiah, and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcasts, brought to you by the Polysleep studio. Hi, everyone. Hey, Cheryl. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. Very good. You know, I'm so excited about this episode because being a geek, I was like, I can't wait to talk about technology. and today, I'm super excited to have not one doctor, Dr. Cheryl Galloy, but also a second doctor with us, Dr. Luc Beaudoin, who's joining us from Vancouver as well, I think. He is currently a professor at Simon Fraser University, and his specialty is cognitive science. He also is the founder of Coxie app, which is, I tried my sleep button app. It's pretty cool. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. He's also the co-founder of Somnolence Plus, I think, Cheryl. So thank you so much for joining us, Luc, today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And oh, by the way, Somnolence Plus, that name, I have to give that the credit to Duke. Sorry, Luc.
Speaking of names.
Yeah. Well, basically, Luc, he came up with the idea for Somnolence Plus, and part of that has to do with the theory of insomnolence, which I'm sure you'll be talking about today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And where I'm just curious, why the plus?
Because it's more than just...
It's more than just somnolence. Interesting.
Yes.
I like it. Thanks for that. So, Luc, I want to start with the first question, just to make sure everybody's on the same level. You've studied cognitive science since a very young age, I think, reading your bio, and that has been a passion you've developed throughout the years. Yeah. So please explain to me what is cognitive science in particular, because it seems to touch so many things, and my understanding was mostly about its impact on AI, but it's so much more than that.
You know, it's really interesting, because you're spot on to have emphasized AI, because it's the core discipline of cognitive science. Although it's actually not often recognized that that's the case, because people think of AI as being technological, but the roots of AI, going back to Alan Turing, are theoretical and scientific. You know, it's cognitive science is the modern interdisciplinary science of the human mind. You can think of it as psychology on steroids, going beyond psychology. Psychology is just one of the disciplines. There's also neuroscience. There's philosophy, there's artificial intelligence that I mentioned. There's linguistics, anthropology, anything that has something to contribute to the understanding of let's say the human mind. It's fair game. We're going to bring it in and call it cognitive science. So if something is multidisciplinary, what that means is that around a table like you're sitting at with Cheryl and virtually with myself here, you know, there's an expert in each discipline. Interdisciplinary is that, okay, everyone at the table needs to be reasonably well grounded in each of the disciplines so that they can switch their thinking. They can look at, in this case, at the human mind from a psychological perspective, which tends to be very experiment-driven or data-driven, or artificial intelligence, or as a linguist or a philosopher even. I didn't mention philosophy; it's actually key. So that's cognitive science. It's a bit of a misnomer, cognitive, because cognitive, if we go back to the Greeks and Aristotle, and is that people think of that as something dry, as the thinking and the perception aspect. And to a certain extent, that has affected, it's not how cognitive science has progressed as a discipline, but it is meant to be about the entire human mind. As a matter of fact, about the entire person now. So, like, including affect, which is emotion and moods and attitudes, anything that the brain does, you know, you can think of it as a software. The cognitive part is a software that's running on the brain, but we're interested in that totality. So that's what it's about. And yeah, I'm passionate about that. My PhD's in that. As an undergraduate, I had effectively a cognitive science degree. They weren't giving them undergraduate wise in those days, but it was very interdisciplinary, and my main interest was artificial intelligence. So yeah, and that's my professional life. I'm also CogZest is it's my sole proprietorship, and that's basically to say it's the dry cognition, but it's also all the zest means emotion and just loving that. So yeah, that's I live and breathe that stuff, and I've been fortunate to have that for most of my professional career, to be basically immersed in that.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you for that. And just out of curiosity, how did you guys meet?
Okay, we're in the same lab. So, okay, when we were talking about research and, you know, this cognitive science, and I come from an educational technology background. Now, there's this significant overlap between these two very multidisciplinary fields. So, for instance, when we talk about this from an educational technology perspective, we're looking at the different kinds of definitions for learning, what that means for you. So, for instance, you have behaviorism. Remember cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia? That's looking at the external. How does your environment influence you, and how do you learn from that perspective? Now, there came a time where, you know, people are like, okay, there's a black box here. What's going inside the mind? And from there, we have the cognitive turn. So that's a shifting of perspective, or a paradigm shift, in which case we want to see the internal processes that are going, the internal processes that are going on in someone's mind. And so that's going to also influence how you teach things and learn things. And from there, you're getting a whole bunch of literature now affecting, for instance, motivation, right? So I've often spoken about DC and Ryan, for instance. I think I've mentioned them before.
Yeah.
And there's that turn. Without the cognitive turn, we wouldn't be talking about that. Now, there are other turns as well, if you wish, other kinds of ways of looking at it, like the social, constructionist views, etc. But the cognitive turn is very important, and we do use it a lot in technology. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. And talking about technology, which is what we really want to dig in today. Over the past 100 years, the relationship we've developed with technologies, you know, when we go back, and I wasn't there, but TV, when it just came, you know, as a black and white box that people were slowly adopting after radio, to what it is now, you know, we're going like 4K, 8K, even 12K technology, OLED, QLED. There's so many advancements that literally changed everyone's habits, right? What is the current relationship between the human species and technology if we were to take it as a whole? Is it most likely good or actually bad? And I want to put it in perspective, talking about sleep and, you know, rest. Is it more of a distraction that became a nuisance and slowly we're bringing it back to something that helps us, or it's most likely something positive?
Luc, do you want to take this?
Well, I mean, sure. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other is typically the way it goes, right? I mean, we humans are driven to create technology, and as much as we lament some of the adverse consequences, we would not have the comforts and well-being that we have, and be living so productively and such long lives if it weren't for tech. So I think it's easily said that it's the same thing for sleep. And it could be misutilized, and a lot of people are aware of that. And yet it's so addictive. Your little tech things that culture and every individual that's born into it's going to have to figure it out. Like anything else, you just have to figure it out. But yeah, I'd say definitely there's tremendous potential. And technology is not just information technology. We think of it that way because it's so evident, but it's all technology. We've developed a treatment, a cognitive treatment, meaning it's something that you can do without medication, although it could be helped with, say, wearables. We'll talk about that. But that's technology too. Any little hack that, mind hack, brain hacks, how to get along with your spouse, that's technology. It's a way of doing things. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to expand upon that too. I mean, if you think about technology, it's a tool, a resource, a tool that you use, and it can be soft. So it doesn't have to be hard technology, tangible. It could be something that, a way of thinking even, or an approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, we wouldn't have this podcast and we wouldn't be able to speak with Luc right now without the advancement in technology we have. And it's for, I hope, the best. We're trying here to educate people about sleep and all. So there's definitely positive advantage. What I had in mind when I asked the question is more about, the correlation with LED, noise pollution, visual pollution everywhere. So, but at the same time, our brain is just so smart. Marketers like I am originally have a very hard time and have to be very creative because the attention span and the capacity for the brain to filter ads now, because we're overexposed all the time, is incredible. So
that's a great point. We think of, there was a book called The Shallows, which I actually wrote a book responding to, in a sense. My cognitive productivity book, my first one. The Shallows said, we're being, rewired by technology and we can't focus anymore and all this stuff. But your point is, and actually I just read a paper yesterday, not a summary of a paper yesterday, to the effect that, we just, the brain just adapts and your attention, basically you learn. Yeah, we're just filtering so much stuff out. But obviously some of it's affecting us, but so it's very, very, very complicated. But yeah, you could easily go down a rabbit hole at night. And if you don't put your phone down, the way I like to think about it is your smartphone, this evolutionarily, your brain, we have not evolved as a species. Our DNA has not evolved to understand that this is just a gadget. It's it classifies this thing, I'm sure, and there's research to suggest that you infer from the results of the research that this is actually, as far as your brain's concerned, this is an animal. So if I were to just put this, I were to do an IQ test with this phone right next to me and in another condition not next to me. So we repeat this with multiple individuals. You do a scientific experiment and you compare when there's a phone right next to the person, face down. I put it face down, and no phone. And you find that the results of the test are actually better if the phone's not there. So why is that? Because your brain is processing lots of information, and basically it's saying there's an animal next to me. Animals can be very nice, but they can also do things. They are agents. A phone's an agent that at any time might initiate a behavior. Whereas my brain says, it's all okay. This is just a cup. It's not going to blow up at me. Therefore, if you put that phone next to your bed when you're going to bed, well, you have to understand that your brain is thinking there's an animal there. But guess what? There's research saying that if you sleep with a dog, you don't sleep as well. If you sleep with a human being, there's that too. Why? Because that your brain is allocating a certain amount of resources for that. So we're equipped for that. We can deal with it, but it's something that one has to factor into the overall scenario. Yeah.
Okay, to bring it back. Remember we were talking.
Yeah, better because I'll be talking forever.
Oh no, no, but because
but it's
actually that's fine. But I was just thinking about another episode where we were talking about having a sleep partner in your bed, and remember I said pets and children. If you have them in your bed, well then you're not going to have. You won't sleep as well. However, if you have a sleep partner who's, your girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, etc., then you tend to have good quality sleep. Well, this potentially what Luc is saying could potentially be a reason for that. When you're with a child, you're wondering, is this child okay? So your attention isn't...
Especially if you're a mother.
Yes,
if you're
if
dad,
you're
you
a
might
mother.
just be sleeping. Is this child going to be quiet? That's your main concern.
And then same thing with a pet. Am I going to have to walk him, the dog, or
Yeah,
something?
you become stressed almost.
Yeah.
Funny enough, what you mentioned about that is like, let's say you're in a public environment, the gym, a cafe, whatever, and you just realize, oh, I forgot my phone. This adrenaline rush almost that comes, hits you, and you're like, and it's not just about the monetary aspect of it, because these things are getting expensive, right? It's like, oh my God, you feel as bad as if you have left your best friend somewhere, on the table, hanging there.
Close.
And you're like,
it's that essential. It's a
it's crazy how
I need this.
Yeah, how attached we became to this. And talking about that, so technology evolved. Phones, I don't know anyone who on purpose don't have, smartphones. Wearables are also something that becomes more and more adopted. Mm-hmm. And most of them nowadays offer sleep tracking. Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably good in a way where we're becoming more conscious about, different sleep stages and all, but how accurate it is.
Luke, do you want to take this one?
So, we're just actually, Cheryl and I and colleagues, academia, are actually just writing a paper right now, a very long paper on wearables. And we focus on, my research focuses on sleep onset and insomnolence. But anyway, so that's just a general context. And there's a lot of interest in these devices, and people are using them. And that's all very well and good. They can give you course information, but specifically what you referenced, which is called sleep staging, which is figuring out what the exact stage that you're in. It's if you're just doing what's called actigraphy, which is what these things do, and measuring pulse, you can't really, at this point, the technology is not there, and it may never be there because the signal is just not there. You can't infer everything from a little signal, right? So the EEG is required. Now, what I like to add whenever I talk about EEG, because we've become accustomed to thinking of EEG as, okay, it's the gold standard for sleep staging, right? But you have to understand that EEG itself is just an oversimplification. It's kind of it is a simplification of what is happening in the brain, because they're more or less reliable, nice quantitative. What's EEG is basically the electrical patterns of your brain, right? So you can wear these devices in a lab, and they'll tell you quite precisely, because electricity is easy to measure, what the patterns are. But those patterns are just a super oversimplification. Now, it's relevant because a colleague of ours, Daniel K, in somewhere in the U.S. now, his university is just not coming to my head. They published a very important paper in 2017 that showed that the supposed overactivity of the brain of people who have insomnia, it's called hyperarousal. It's one of these things that I'm really been trying to debunk myself. So when I saw his paper, I was, oh man, you guys are spot on. Anyway, is that, so you put them in EEG and you're seeing all this activity and you conclude, wow, the brain's hyper-aroused in insomniacs when they're sleeping. And that is true as far as EEG goes. But if you put them in fMRI, which gives you a different, deeper picture, literally a picture of what's happening in the brain, but it's still a picture. Yeah. You see, some areas are overactive, but guess what? Some areas are underactive, which stands to reason, So what are those areas? I'm trying to figure that out because I'm really interested in this question. Well, you would expect, and this is something that theoretically is not worked out yet, but what would you expect I would expect, is that it's the inhibition that's being deactivated, which enables causes basically your higher function, your prefrontal cortex, where your higher level deliberation and worrying and rumination that happens even while you're asleep, right? To become overactive. Why is it overactive? Because something else is underactive. That's a key distinction. Anyway, it's a long-winded answer to come back to your wearable technology. Well, we're not wearing fMRI, right? And then 10 years from now, somebody's going to invent some kick-ass technology that's going to make fMRI look like it was like, oh my God, they were such dinosaurs to use fMRI, which in a sense you could expect to happen already, because fMRI is the averaging of information. The brain is so complex.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because basically you almost have anxiety now when you look at your Apple Watch or your health app, and you're like, oh, this week my deep sleep, my REM sleep went down by 25%. So we're basically saying here, don't overthink it. It's great signals, but don't freak out. It's not
that's
perfect.
the main takeaway. I mean, for all this stuff, really, its attitude towards sleep is so important that, like, don't freak out. And that is, but more generally, I mean, I'm a tracker. I'm into this movement called the quantified self, which is about, tracks so many things. Like, I log everything I do. I'm insane. Well, not everything, but, I log quite a bit. I've got an oxygen tracker, etc. But if you,
interesting.
If you worry about this too much.
I think that, okay, so in terms of coaching, what do we do? When people come to me with a tracker, I say, well, you know what? Sometimes it's not exactly the most accurate. So what I prefer that you do is take, of course, recording your own self-report of your own sleep diary. That comes with its own issues too. But what I like there is that they take ownership of that. So then, instead of just looking at the tracker, they're actually putting into practice something of, let me take responsibility for how much time I'm putting. So I'm not just tracking my time. I'm actually something else isn't just tracking my time. I'm tracking my time. And there is that distinction. I also like the fact that we only do it for 2 or 3 weeks, unless it's warranted that we need to do something for a little longer. The reason why is precisely because tracking for someone who's experiencing a sleep, who may be experiencing sleep issues, that can lead to what you're referring to as anxiety, right? And so it's sort of like that person who's trying to stick to a planned eating schedule or diet that's prescribed. And they're tracking it all the time. But if they do that all the time, every single day, measuring themselves every single day, morning and evening, that can actually do a disservice to them, because there are regular fluctuations. And so, again, it's the whole idea of getting enough information for yourself so you can do something about it, and then putting into practice sleep hygiene and other aspects of building a sleep routine, maintaining that consistent schedule so that you don't get stuck. And yes, if you notice that one day you're not sleeping as much, well, then you can correct it the next day, and keep moving forward, right? And I don't even know if I like the word correct there, but it's just, but you can do something about it.
Slight adjustment
based
on...
Exactly,
and
tweak.
It's funny because hearing you say that, and there's also almost like a meditative element associated with, we talked about journaling, for example, instead of just watching your phone or your watch with all these stats, how do I feel? How did I felt today? My level of energy, how rested I was. And like you said, the signal might be in correlation with that, but they might be off as well. And that's fine. Yeah. So,
but I'm not saying that trackers are totally bad. I'm just saying there's a time and place for it, and where I don't want I would say use trackers as a tool, but don't live your life by them. They're there to give you information that will help you to develop plans that you can then implement and keep moving forward.
And that's interesting. Yeah. Would you say that's the biggest misconception? Is that, it's a great tool, but it has to be and remain a tool?
Yes. If you were to ask me, yes, because it's not enough to just track. You have to have a purpose for tracking, but I also know that people have said to me, I love it because it reminds me to sleep well. And for those people, continue using it because it's reminding you to keep a
good sleep hygiene.
Yeah, exactly. A good schedule, etc. But for those people out there who have a tendency to maybe feel anxious or stressed about it, limit its use.
A couple of things I would kind of add to this is, first of all, where I, criticized or the trackers, or at least limited, saying, you know what, they're limited utility. They can't track everything, but they can give you important information. I mean, just your pulse. That's what I look at. I'm not looking at the actigraphy. I'm not interested in that. I look at my pulse and I can infer when essentially I fell asleep and when I woke up. And I do. It's not true. I do have some motion things that I look at because I wake up once or twice a night. And that gives, so I can infer, my total sleep time. I've got other gadgets, like I know how much I sleep, and I like that. This is something that was not available before.
Yeah.
Even myself, going back earlier in my life, I would track manually, and that's much more effortful. So if you talk about, what's technology giving? Well, it's making this automatic so you don't have to arouse yourself as much to put in your spreadsheet or whatever, because I was interested in this. The other thing I'd say is go back to Cheryl has mentioned is Desi and Ryan. Okay, they're psychologists who've helped us a lot understand, how to think about ourselves and each other when we, as psychologists, when we look at other people and say when we understand them, that people seek competence, they seek relatedness, and they seek autonomy, and we should treat them as autonomous agents. So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm tracking, and I say, well, wow, you're obsessed, you're like me, that's good, we're in. No, I say it's like, we can manage our relationship to technology and each other. So mindfulness is very, and the Buddhist tradition and the Stoics, but the mindfulness stuff is very popular these days. And attachment theory is very popular, and they've all have things to offer. Now, if we look at attachment stuff, what's attachment? It's basically this idea that, your relationship to your mother and your primary caregiver as you grew up, super important. If that gets disrupted, you're screwed. And we get attached to particular people, that gets disrupted, we're screwed. And they look at that and they say, hold on, we're autonomous agents. Things get disrupted, blow up. We've evolved to be able to deal with all kinds of things. So let's not pitch ourselves as being these weak people who can't handle, blowing up an attachment, relationships blow up, your mother dies. My dad's very sick now. I don't think he's going to be around for very long. Sorry, Dad, but I'm going to keep going. You know what I mean? And same thing with technology. It's like, goes back, this guy, Viktor Frankl, The Will to Meaning, that great book. I mean, what is he saying? You can be in a prisoner of war camp with nothing, and you can control your attitude. And if you can control your attitude, you can actually be, I might not be thriving in those circumstances, but you'll have a measure of happiness.
Yeah, definitely. So, you have a lot of control over, what the willpower often affects drastically how your perception of outside environments are, right?
Yes.
Yeah. A very simple example of that is, it's funny enough, if I were to go in a big crowd enjoying a concert, I would have a blast. But I know people who don't like crowds, who don't like music that is too loud, that they would have such a hard time, adapting and enjoying that environment. And same goes for many things. So that I like that analogy. It's a great example.
And I like, if I just might jump in, I just want to emphasize, like, you're hitting all these things here. We don't even have to answer your questions. We could just emphasize what you're saying that's so spot on. It's the individual differences, is so important. What's good for one may be difficult and unpleasant for the other. Yeah.
And as we try to educate people about, and it's all really about sleep hygiene, right? To have proper habits that are built that are very different from an individual to another. There's a common ground. But in terms of innovation and tech, what are the latest innovation in tech that, like you said, it's amazing that you mentioned that. The technology we have today is so different from what we had even 10 years ago. And we don't know what in 20 years, what it's going to look like. But in terms of latest technology based on research, what do we see improving and helping us, in our quests to recuperate faster, better, being more efficient, improve our well-being, all that.
Okay, may I suggest something here? I would say, Luke, how about this? We were talking about it's all about sleep hygiene. I like that you said that, because is it all about sleep hygiene? What are some of the things that we could do beyond sleep hygiene, and where can we bring technology in the future? I think starting with the idea of that cognitive turn, but in the sleep field, because right now, this is something that Luc and I have discussed a lot, and it's actually what I think Luc and the research that he's doing can bring to the table is this idea of what is going on in our mind on sleep research. Now, if this is the case, then the way you're going to be developing wearables, the way you're going to be developing tech, the things that you do in your environment, but also internally, there's going to be a little shift there also. So it's not one or the other, but it could be both together, complementing each other, right? And so in terms of technology that we currently have, and for techniques that we have in treatment, you're talking about more behaviorist, cognitive behavior therapy, for instance. So there is some cognitive there, but it's really the behavior side. And sleep hygiene, a lot of it, as we noticed, is like changing your environment. So remember, I kept talking about Pavlov's dog, classical conditioning, right? You have that phone, you're developing that association. Did you notice how Luc just talked about that phone being perceived by your mind, which is an internal process, as being an animal? That if you ask that question to a behaviorist, they would not even ask that question, because what's going on in your mind is irrelevant. But if you ask a cognitive scientist, now they're going to be looking at that phone and they're going to be asking different questions. That could now inform treatment or the way you approach sleep in a very different way than from a behaviorist's perspective. Right now, you're looking at motivations,
True.
internal processes, your states, your internal states, your mental states. And that's really exciting about Luc's angle or perspective. Do you want to take it from here, Luc?
Sure. Technology, I think, was kind of the starting point, and you're saying, well, let's look at the technology and tech and cognitive. To kind of pop up a little bit, I think even at a basic level, there's extra stuff that we can look at, which is oxygen saturation levels, for instance. I mean, I tend to focus on insomnolence is what I call it, which is a difficulty falling asleep or getting back to sleep, which is basically the key problem in insomnia. Not the only problem, but it's the main one. Let's talk about sleep apnea. Is that you've got these trackable devices now, these wearable devices where you can measure your blood saturation level, how much the percentage of oxygen, in your blood. That's for somebody with sleep apnea. That is the metric. You go ahead, get yourself that device, figure out how to understand it, and you can then use that to really track, to really get to the bottom of your sleep apnea. So I've got this whole story, which we could talk about one day, about I've had, surprise, sleep apnea, but it's actually something else. It was affecting my oxygen. It took me a long time to figure it out, but because I had those data, I was able to drill down and test hypotheses. And one might say, oh, you're obsessing. People would tell me, actually, Luc, you're just obsessing with your sleep. No. If this is so critical, I have to get this sorted out, because the amount of oxygen in your blood is going to affect things like, every cell. And your risk of having a stroke goes up if you don't, why? Because it has to do with the oxygen stuff, right? So that allowed me to really dive in and figure it out. Now I'm sleeping very well and I'm full of energy and I'm my old self back. So that's at the fundamental biology level. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff like at the higher level, like EEG stuff, going back to EEG wearables and electromagnetic stimulation, and you can, and electrical stimulation of the brain. Those are things that there's technology that's evolving, which not prime time yet, but I can see where it's going. I mean, humans are just so good at this, and using artificial intelligence now to crunch immense number of numbers. So I'm excited by technology that will be able to detect what you're thinking. It just enabling you to give commands. It's not wearable form factor yet, but you can actually do mind reading is coming. It's not wearable yet, but you put somebody in with the right equipment in a lab and you can figure out something about what they're thinking. So you get to that point, and this is what we're looking in the paper. It's a long theoretical paper, but what we're really driving to is the end, which is look at what you can do with these wearables if you have this big understanding. And I think one of the problems is that some of the folks doing the wearables and people doing this traditional psychology of like CBTI, they don't have the big picture yet. They don't have the cognitive science. So, but if you could put that together, you can make the most spectacular wearables. So this is just context. I haven't answered your question specifically. We can do that, point to specific things, but I see these technologies as being super exciting. I mean, this is where I want to be, and that's why we wrote the paper.
I mean, it's almost going science fiction now, but when you see like the experiments, I'm thinking Neuralink, for example. We've all seen these tests with the monkeys, which are a bit scary. But when I think of your research, Luc, and how much the understanding of all these patterns, and I'm thinking chronotypes, and then I'm thinking, ChatGPT, which is agglomerating so much data to output something so astonishing. Are we going to get to a point where we will be able to train ourselves based on chronotypes and habits? This is when I need to do that, and that wearable device, which is not even a wearable anymore, right? It's literally part of us. Will become something, and that might be not in 5 years. I mean, I guess not. But do you think we're going to get as far as that, as to kind of being able to reprogram ourselves to improve, our sleeping patterns and experience, because we get to know so much about it?
Yes, I think there is a potential that we will go towards. I mean, we're already moving in that direction. I always, though, bring the ethics of back into the question, like, to what degree do we want to tend that over, right? I mean, like, but yet at the same time, I recognize its value. So when we start talking about the mind reading, yes, they can actually now start to look inside your brain, look at patterns, and map out your thoughts. To what degree do I want people to know my thoughts? So that's also something that has to be thought about when you're designing wearables. What are the extents of privacy?
Privacy, yeah.
Yet at the same time, I can imagine that given those ethical concerns and finding ways to work with them.
Because we trust Elon,
right?
Let's face it.
Yeah.
We trust Elon.
Yeah.
We're good with Elon.
Well, like basically once we work the ethics of that and determine our boundaries, how, I think there is utility in treatments. But again, just like with any tool, there are pros and there are cons, and then we have to figure out how to do it. But we need time to also think things through.
Yeah, because that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's
it
a
is.
big deal. Yet at the same time, imagine how much you can help someone if they were able to use the technology ethically and well.
Yeah, and you could save life, because I remember Myra was talking about, a certain type that is quite rare of people who actually can't sleep and they end up like dying. Right?
Oh, yeah,
It's
yes.
You can.
Yeah.
type of
that's
insomnia,
great,
right?
Great example. Very few of us have that level of insomnia, but if you, if there's a part of your brain that's your hypothalamus regulates so many things, including sleep. If that's out of whack, this could be a lifesaver. But I think, so we can kind of say, okay, there's these ethical concerns, and probably would prefer to use Apple technology, which is privacy. Once they get into the brain, or rather than, I don't know, a company that we trust with our data. Having said that, there's potential, but let's get into the specifics, because we've been talking very abstractly about what the technology can do. So if we're going to talk about wearables, that help with, say, sleep onset, what are the specific things they can do? Well, according to, we're developing this somnolent information processing theory. Sorry to throw this out, but we call it the SIP theory. It's just how you fall asleep or don't fall asleep. And according to that, there's a number of things that can affect falling asleep. One of them is your brain has to decide, is it time to fall asleep? Is it safe? Is it appropriate? Is this thing going to bite me? Or is it, maybe not such a risk, And it makes that computation. And if it feels essentially safe, then it says, okay, we can license sleep. Now, if somebody can't fall asleep, typically I would say it's because there's something in the brain's underlying that little, you can think of it as a very small system, but it actually has this tentacles throughout your brain, the sleep onset control system. Okay. So think of your brain as having this little thing, like it's like your dog. Your dog is looking at you. It might be sitting there, and it's kind of looking at you. It doesn't really know what you're thinking. It's that simple, but it can tell if you're angry. It can tell if you're afraid. It can tell if there's a danger. Okay. So your sleep onset control system is kind of your pet watchdog for, is it safe to fall asleep? And should I fall asleep? And you can't delay it for too long because there's a danger there. I mean, if you don't sleep, then you're going to die. So eventually, so it's there. So we have to understand how that thing works. And we could talk about that at length. We think there's basically 7 major classes of factors that need to be considered for this in this new theory we're putting forward. Now,
well,
one of them is...
Yeah, what would them, if we can just go quickly through it, because I found it fascinating.
Yeah, well, okay, so we'll say that the main thing, to give credit where credit is due, is they're called chronobiological factors. So your brain has these time measurement devices. They're simple. They go way back to the beginning of evolutionary life, of time. And there's 2 kind of major things that they do. One is, hey, what time is it with respect to the sun? Every living thing needs to know that. It's almost, okay? Definitely every mammal needs to know that, okay? Because they make bet. Basically, evolution is about placing a bet. And every species places different bets. And within different species, you can have different bets. The human bet is, it's best to operate during the day where there's light, because we've evolved this machinery to see. We're not bats. We're not very good at echolocation. So let's try to do things during the day. So when is the day? Need to know that. Okay. So we're programmed to we know that unconsciously, and go outside, hit the light. Why are you doing that? Why do people say that? Well, they'll tell you, it's your melatonin and all this stuff. Yeah. That's the technical reason. The evolutionary reason is your brain needs to know when it can do its thing, when it could be a successful autonomous agent. And for humans, that means daylight. So it's tracking that, and as that goes away, your kind of your level of your disposition to sleep is going to change. Okay. The other thing it has, because there's wear and tear of being awake, if you decide for whatever reason to flip that around and you want to be nocturnal because it's really unsafe right now. For 5 years, we've been attacked by the tribe over there, and they like doing their thing at night. So we're going to have to be awake at night too, because I don't know what they like about night, but that's when they do their thing. So you need to be the other factor. It's saying, okay, let's time things. And that's another and we call that the sleep pressure. Okay, it's very rudimentary. And basically you wake up and now you've got a stopwatch going, boom. And tick, 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 tick. And as that tick goes up, then your propensity to sleep will actually increase. So these 2 factors are working, in effect, that they're working against each other, but they're basically working together to figure out when it's time to fall asleep. So that's credit where credit is due, okay? Fascinating stuff happening there. You wouldn't believe, like, the timers are actually all over your body. They used to think they were just in a specific, like, suprachiasmatic nucleus, right? A specific part of your hypothalamus. Then they found out, oh my God, these things seem to be all over the brain. Then you say, oh fuck, well, pardon my language. Bleep that out.
We're gonna beep that. That's fine.
Oh my goodness. These things are all over the body.
Cellular.
Well, of course.
Wow.
And then in retrospect, it's like, of course they're all over the body, because go back to the amoeba, go back to the simpler organisms. They didn't have all this complicated stuff. We're so used to thinking of ourselves as, oh, it's super complicated. It's all happening up here. Have you ever seen The Adventures of Baron Munchausen? Okay, you have to go see that film. It's Robin Williams is in it. And he plays this kind of king of the moon, and it's got a head and the rest of this body, and they become detached. And the head just wants to be the head. The body is saying, let's do what bodies like to do. So we're everything, and its chronobiology is distributed throughout the body. Oh, surprise, surprise. Anyway, so that's one thing. Another thing is.
Can I just interject there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
yeah,
so
you better. You had better.
Okay, so you were talking about diurnal and nocturnal. Well, there was a period of time actually that they found where we did become nocturnal because it was unsafe. So while we started off diurnal, we ended up having to adapt to circumstances, and we became nocturnal for a bit until it became safe again to be
Okay,
diurnal.
what I don't understand is why can you get away with using the word diurnal? I've been using, I've been using it. I use it with my wife sometimes, and she says, "Why are you using those fancy words? Just use daytime."
That's right. That's right. It's because you're here. Had you not been here, I would have been saying daytime and nighttime. Sorry. Okay, so
we were talking about the
daytime.
status game earlier. It's unconscious.
Let's bring it back.
Okay.
Like daytime
and nighttime.
Good.
So
I like that.
At one point, we started off as daytime people, and then we became more nighttime people. But that was in response to our environment and how safe it was.
When was that?
Oh gosh, you know what? You can look.
You can't say that if I don't have an example.
Okay, so
yeah, we need to know the time.
It's in nature. So if somebody can look that up, that would be really cool. Go into nature and look up. It was a study that was done a couple of years ago where we became
the whole species.
Nighttime.
That's kind of weird.
I think it was where we operated more at night, and I think this was. This is pretty ancient. It would have been. It was,
okay, so that can be a discussion.
Yeah, but...
So, go ahead.
So basically, that's it. I mean, I don't know when night owls started to evolve. Maybe they were there from the beginning. There are different theories, like I had said before. But you do have this variation. Yeah. And so that's something to consider, too, when you're thinking of chronobiology and chronotypes
and all that.
So the other thing, let's go back to emotions.
Let's go back to
Here's the thing.
Yes.
Here, if you can't fall asleep, like let's suppose that you go to bed and you're terrified. That little dog is going to say, "No, don't fall asleep." So there's something to do with emotions. If you're obsessed with something, if you're starving, if you're cold. So all these things are being factored in. We're trying to structure that understanding. But one of them is emotion. There's something emotional. Emotions are important, right? So for falling asleep, and you got to know that you're not in an intense emotional state, one would think. But then the problem is, how do you understand emotions? And it looks simple, but scientifically there's been arguments going on forever, and it's such a mess. But what I would say is there's this phenomenon called, I hope you don't mind a fancy word, but it's a lot of fun. And it's simple, and once you get it, it's fun. It's called mental perturbance. And what that is that you've got some motivation, a concern, a worry, whatever. It could be something positive, like Christmas Eve. Kids can't fall asleep easily on Christmas. I don't know about you, but I mean,
because of the gifts, right?
Yeah. If you grew up in Christian society, your parents weren't beating you on Christmas Day. What's that?
It depends where, because in the Philippines and in Quebec, I know we tend to we celebrate on Christmas Eve. We stay up all night.
Yeah, you say very well
in
for a while because you've been drinking all Christmas Eve, and then
Anglophone areas don't celebrate.
But it's funny that you mentioned that, because
Christmas Eve.
When I was a kid, yes, you had to go to bed in the morning. You had your gifts.
Yeah.
Couldn't. Impossible. Not gonna happen.
That's
exactly.
True.
So that's the thing.
True.
So we need to understand that.
Yeah.
So the mental perturbance idea is basically, you can think of it as an intense preoccupation or a little obsession or whatever. Let's say that, let's spin it positively. One of my things, I'm really interested in romantic love and infatuation, and what's that all about? Well, basically it's your genes saying, hello, you know what the end game is? It's actually about her. It's about you and her and having children so that we, the genes, can continue to exist. So that's what it's all about. So your brain produces these motivations. And those motivations for humans, because we've got all this cortex fooling ourselves into thinking that we are important, our genes aren't, is that you gotta fool the cortex. You gotta get the cortex on track. So the motivator is basically telling you whatever it is. Like here, it's like, I'm this person. She's so important. I can't stop thinking about her. What's that? So that's a mental perturbance. If you're like my father is sick, and I think it's who knows, his time might be up, and I'm going to experience grief when he goes away. I won't be able to just say, okay, well, Dad's gone, and let's move on to the next thing. Because why is that? It's because your evolutionarily old brain, the dog, look at the dog. When the owner passed away, the dog doesn't understand what the hell's going on. I haven't seen my owner unless he's seen the person being dead. The guy doesn't come back. He's not going to want to give it up because he doesn't understand. The dog doesn't understand. So your brain has this old part, and it says, "Oh, I want this person back."
Yeah.
So that when you're going to bed, when you're in bed, and if a part of your brain is increasing this, is activating this motivator, making it more, we call it insistent. It's insisting to be attended to. You won't be able to fall asleep. So that's one of the key. We're just on principle 2, and we've been talking forever, or postulate 2. But there's another another.
Just to confirm, with that principle is the one. Let's say I gotta catch a flight early tomorrow morning, and I'm so stressed about missing the flight that I've put 5 alarms, but I still can't fall asleep. Would that be this one, or that's another one?
This is a key idea. This is the one. It's the key one here. Now, I have to say that we're fighting it out, the scientists, because the prevailing view, which I'm trying to debunk, the prevailing view is that because it's the man on the moon thing. Like, it's like scientists have bought into this guy, this Baron Munchausen. They watch a Robin Williams thing and they think, yeah, that's it. There's this dichotomy, No. So the prevailing view is that it's hyperarousal. Remember we talked about that and how Daniel K managed to knock that off a titch? Like, I want to knock it completely off. It's not about the cortex. The dog can't understand the cortex. Too complex. Okay. Hyperarousal, all this stuff. No. It's about the motivation. So you're concerned, and it's the brain saying, not a good time to fall asleep because I've got this insistent motivator. So in a sense, it's a lot simpler. My concept of mental perturbance is a lot simpler. It's just saying there's an insistent motivation, and not a good time to fall asleep if that's happening. So, but the positive side is if you understand that mechanism, then you can do things. You can have these treatments. You can trick the brain. If you can knock that motivation off, my prediction is just knock the motivator out, and you're going to find all of a sudden this person's going to be able to fall asleep. If the clock things are saying it's time to fall asleep. So your clock thing might be saying, your chronobiology will say, hey, it's time to fall asleep. But if the motivator is insistent, you're out of luck. But there's other postulates. So we're trying to understand all these different things so that we can divide. Well, we like the understanding in science. Hey, that's cool. But ultimately, we want to develop applications. And one of the applications we're developing called the cognitive shuffle is to basically fool the brain, or you might say reprogram, but I wouldn't use that expression, to get the brain to think it is safe and appropriate and timely to fall asleep. Let's do it.
So basically you're throwing a bone at the dog and you're like, don't worry, I'm going to be fine. Pretty much.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I should write that down. Well, it's going to be, that's a great analogy. Right? Exactly.
You're tricking him to say, yes, my environment is safe. Stop worrying about me. I'm going to fall asleep and it's fine.
Exactly. And you've given them the bone so they don't have to work for it, in a sense. They don't have to go find it. It's right there. The dog might even say, okay, yeah, I'm going to pass that. I'm good now. Keep the dog busy. Yeah, I love that. And my God, this is great. Thank you very much. You're a member of the team now.
Great. But that's amazing because, and you know what, let me do a bit of promotion because I tried your app.
Yes.
Okay. So is My Sleep Button basically a trick to help us kind of distract ourselves from this and ultimately help us fall asleep a bit faster?
Is that the question, or?
Yeah, I was wondering because
is it a trick, or how does it work?
How does it work? So let's put it that way.
It is a trick, but it's not just about distraction.
Okay.
So we've talked about something that's kind of like distraction, and more generally, I would say it's to make yourself feel safe and feel that there's nothing urgent that you need to do. Because remember, there's kids as well, right? Like with Christmas Eve kids, like they feel safe. They just. Anyway, so there's the whole kind of decreasing the insistence, like trick you into feeling safe and decreasing the insistence and the intensity of motivation. Intensity is how strongly you'll pursue it. Insistence is how much you're going to think about it. They go together. So, and then there's this alarm things we haven't talked about, which relates to stress. You guys are in Montreal, so Hans Selye invented the stress concept in psychology. So we can talk about that later. But I'll just give you a key thing that's less distraction oriented, and that's this idea that, the system, the sleep onset control system is going to look at your thinking patterns and your what's going on in your brain, not just thinking, and saying, hey, this looks a lot like falling asleep. Therefore, it's okay to continue falling asleep. So you don't fall asleep instantly. If your sleep pressure is super high and everything's right, you might fall asleep very fast, but it's still not instantaneous. And in other circumstances, it can take several minutes to transition from wake to sleep, right? So so it's a process. And part of the process, according to our theory, is this sleep onset control system is doesn't really understand what's happening, but saying, that looks vaguely like the sleep is happening all over the place in the brain. Brain is really complicated. You can't just perceive that, So it's trying to figure out the pattern. Yeah, it looks like sleep. And one of the things that happens, which most people don't actually know, is that as they're falling asleep, they will have, they know that thinking becomes fuzzy, right? It's like you've had a few drinks. We know that. But if you have enough drinks and marijuana, or something like that, you're going to you have magic mushrooms, you're going to start hallucinating.
Shrooms are fine. We're actually going to talk about that in the next episode then. And
there you go.
Drugs
there you
and
go.
all.
I just didn't want to use a technical term for it. So there you go. Mushroom. So if you have your magic mushrooms and you start hallucinating. Okay. If you start hallucinating, that's like the brain is saying, well, there's something really different happening in the sleep onset control system, right? And you don't fall asleep, maybe because the magic mushrooms are knocking out even the dog. Even the dogs can't figure out what to do. But let's put that aside. So as you naturally fall asleep, you start with consciousness, all the rules of consciousness kind of falling apart. What's sleep onset, if not the most important regular transition between being conscious, whatever that means? Well, it means making sense of things and planning and being on alert, versus being like asleep, where all that's weird. It's that, so you start having this loose thinking and you start having these micro dreams. If you wake somebody up as they're falling asleep and say, hey, what's happening? And they might say, oh my God, I was just like, and I was thinking of my grandmother who's been dead for 30 years, and so, and I was imagining her doing something. It was actually a memory. So make a long story short, is if the sleep onset control system perceives this dream-like activity, micro dreams, there's less narrative than the REM dreams that you have later. Okay, and there's a reason for that. So if it perceives that, it'll say, "Oh my God, this." Well, I won't say "Oh my God" because it's not a theist really, but it's just gonna say, "Okay, I can move you towards another step towards sleep, another step towards sleep." Because guess what? You don't tend to hallucinate during the day. We might imagine things, but it doesn't have the vividness of that. So so this, coming back to this cognitive shuffle, which technically is called serial diverse imagining, at least in its main form, you're just imagining things. People might not know, but it gets you to imagine this. Like you might imagine going for a walk, being on a lake. You might imagine Pluto, playing the piano, all these things. Like you don't tend to vividly imagine these different things sequentially during the day. So imagining these things might put you in what I call pro-somnolent, pro-sleep state. So that's just an example of, yes, there's a distraction component, but the technique is meant to pack a punch. It's meant to be, I think about it really like a powerful pill, if you will, that it's got to be very simple, easy to use, just pop the pill. But this one's a cognitive pill, and it has to press a lot of buttons. Now, you think when you take a pill, you're just doing one thing. No, it dissipates, like it's going throughout your whole body. Melatonin affects the whole brain. So this is meant to affect quite a bit of your brain. Yeah.
Interesting.
So essentially, you're priming, sort of like simulating almost. Dreaming, or not dreaming, but the hypnagogic hallucinations.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you can do that, maybe you're making yourself more predisposed to sleeping, because it's sort of simulating that event. So, yeah.
And visualization in general is such a powerful tool, right?
It is.
I've tried, and it was with a psychologist that I love, and I tried that as a way to, prime myself to do certain things that I usually naturally will procrastinate about. And it was auto-hypnosis. And at the beginning, hypnosis, right? And it puts you in such a different states because you visualize that light's going, at every breath from different part of your body and circulating. And you're like, just thinking of that little light as you breathe and concentrate on certain thing can put you in such a different state. And that's kind of what I've experienced with the app a bit too, right? It's quite interesting. So thank you for that, Luc. I wanted to go back. So we've covered 3 points, I think. What would be the 4 other ones quickly for the audience?
Yeah, quickly.
Okay. I wasn't explicit about the alarms thing. So Hans Selye said that we have an alarm reaction in stress. So and we think that that's an idea that has kind of been ignored in psychology. People have been focusing on the neurochemical ever since the stress concept came out, like with respect to the alarms. But we think that actually Keith Oatley, who's not Toronto, he's a very old guy now. He's the one who's, I think, one of the first people who actually brought this alarm thing into cognitive science, but then he left it. He just didn't do anything with it, which is a shame. So we have these alarm states. The broadcast at different levels. There are the neurological alarms, but there's also, like, your brain has these alarm signals. And the difference between alarm and a motivator is that the motivator has specific meaning attached to it. You just don't have an absent, like, if there's no meaning, it's actually a mood, okay? Or it's an alarm. So an alarm basically says, there's something urgent happening, ring the bell. The bell doesn't tell you who's coming, right?
It just says,
if it does, then it's not just then it's Morse code or it's whatever. Okay, so there's that aspect. Another aspect is this, your brain is what I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about the feedback loops, but there's something, basically you get these your brain is creating these transient thoughts. We call them cognitions, representations of all kinds of things all the time. Your brain's doing this. It's not just one serial thought. You're actually building a super complex model. It's not just working memory, for people who know that term. So your brain is always detecting, okay, what's my posture like? Am I moving? How does it feel? What's the light? The sound situation, the soundscape like. So that's kind of an aspect of it. And we're not to say this, actually. A guy called Johns was saying this earlier, that your brain is computing, but what we've done is we put it in a more systematic framework. So that's kind of an important part of it. So yeah, if the implication for sleep onset is that if you could put yourself if you could knock all those things and make them proper, like what's conducive to sleep, the sleep onset control system will say, yeah, we're good. There's an interesting thing that I throw into that is, are you a parent, Jeremiah?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, I bet you some people listening to us are.
Yes.
And they've had their kid in the back of their car and they're driving around and they know. As a matter of fact, sometimes they'll get in the car if they want to put this kid to sleep because they want to have a proper conversation. Let's drive around, put the kid in the back seat, and then, it's got a young child, like under 3, say, and then they'll fall asleep. Well, why is that? Or you rock them to bed or something like that. It looks like rocking is a very effective way to put kids to sleep. Now, I know adults who do this, and there's research on this that rocking helps people fall asleep. Well, that falls into this basically the transient cognitions that for whatever reason evolution has said this is conducive to falling asleep. So we've knocked that one off. We've talked about there's the feedback loops aspect to it, and I alluded to moods and earlier. I said there's alarms and there's moods. These two things have no major semantic content, but they're very important. So what's a mood? Okay, so a mood, it depends on the theory, but basically all the mood theorists seem to generally agree that there's 2 or 3 dimensions involved, depending on how you do this. And one of them is your energy level. Now, that would stand to reason that if you're high energy, maybe you can't fall asleep. Oh, so people have anyway, that's an aspect. I won't go into too much details, but there's another thing, which is tension. Now, tension, if you're very tense, according to our theory, that will actually delay sleep onset a bit. Keep in mind, this system is looking at a lot of things. So you can actually have high tension and still fall asleep. You can actually have high energy and still fall asleep. It's just that if you have high energy, it'll draw you back a little bit.
It'll draw you back a little bit. Wow.
Yeah, so that's it. One of the things that we any psychologist looking at any phenomenon will have to do is consider two things: the evolutionary, the innate factors, and the learning factors. So without going into detail, those are everything we've talked about has innate aspects and it has learned aspects. So you can move the needle a little bit with the learning. And innate actually is
nature nurture.
In a nutshell. But it's gotten complex and so fascinating. I would just recommend to our listeners, our viewers, that they look at a book called Innate by Patrick Mitchell, Irish guy.
I haven't read it either. I'm going to add that to my list.
That is such a beautiful book. And you got to read that because, I'm basically saying, professors, when they're candidates to professorships in just about any discipline, any social science discipline, needs to read that. They need to read that. And the committee need to ask them questions about that, because that's become, because you can't, it's not crazy. What we learned when we were younger about the nature nurture thing, that's out the window. Like, it has changed so much in the last 15 years. They've got such a fascinating understanding. So trying to build a modern theory, one needs to revisit that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the beauty of science in general is, that as exact as it can be today, something's going to debunk it in the next 10, 15, 20 years, just because, we're constantly trying to push the limit, understand things better and all. And it's wonderful. As exact as it is today, it might not be in 20 years from now.
We learn new things, and everything that we learn, there's always a bit of, there's a portion of it that is probable. Like, it's probabilistic, right? So how much we know depends on various factors, but nothing is, let's say, sacred. Mm-hmm. Nothing, because there's always new information, new ways of looking at things. So even if within a particular framework, or way of looking at it, it makes sense, you switch the frame slightly, and those calculations are going to be different, right? So now let's make that more concrete. When you're building a building, you'll use one type of physics. When you're thinking about quantum physics, though, you throw that away to some degree. If you're looking at learning, which is a part of sleep, you're going to look at that slightly differently. So if you're looking at how a person will learn how to sleep better from a behaviorist perspective, sleep hygiene. Let's fix the environment. Let's see associations. Cognitive perspective, now you're starting to think of what's going on in your brain, your states, your motivations, your motivations, your desires, those things affecting you internally. That's going to be a different way of looking at learning. If you start to go into other aspects of learning, like what are the implicit things that you learn, like riding a bike. So to what degree is sleep like riding a bike? What are those things that you can tell people to do? And what are those things that they just have to do? You're just doing. And then that's now switching from looking at knowledge as something that you acquire to something that is not acquired, but that you participate in. And it starts getting, and depending on what kind of wearable you are and what kind of view on learning you have, it's going to look very different.
So going back about that to technology, right? Because I want to wrap it up there, but there's so many different technology when we talk about hardware, and then even more when we talk about software, right? And both works hand in hand. What would you say to someone here being lost a bit about that, but understanding how, sleep hygiene is one thing, but then we have, on the other end, ways to, and I like the fact that you don't want to use the term reprogram, because I find that very intrusive, but, help ourselves into programming ourselves in a better way to have a better night's sleep. What would you suggest to people? Because I'm thinking right now, I'm personally using an Apple Watch. I know people who only swear by Oura. They have a ring as a wearable. What should we say to these people? Just try things and go what works better for you? try different apps, see what works better for you?
Well, maybe if we could just back up. Okay, you want to wrap it up, so we won't go too much into subroutine. But the wearables today and the wearables tomorrow may be very different, right? My and I think Cheryl, we're on the same page with this. Is understanding what we're putting forward and other theories is, I think that can empower people. So think of your wearable in terms of how you understand this, the dog metaphor, the sleep onset control system. How can it contribute? How can it contribute to that? The cognitive shuffle. Full disclosure, we have an app here called My Sleep Button. It's a commercial app, but somebody else could do something similar. It's a wearable in some cases, in that you'd actually have an earphone, and I think your AirPods or whatever you use, that's going to be a very powerful whatever. It's going to be potentially, we've got something very powerful and something as simple as wearable AirPods, right? So delivering content for you to might help you fall asleep, if in the ideal case where this works, whatever theory you're using. So something else like in the future, technology might be able to detect your thought, what stresses you out maybe, and gives you feedback on that, and whether you're what you find easy to imagine. So if it's true that these micro dreams are not just side effects of falling asleep, but partially causative of falling asleep, then the technology that can actually that can actually assess what you can easily imagine, could be very helpful. Now, a futuristic scenario I see, and I think we do need to look into the future, because right now the tech is still rather simple. But like I said, this could potentially be very helpful, whether it's a meditation or whatever, as long as to answer your questions, whatever works for you. John Lennon said, whatever gets you through the night, and that's basically the answer to your question. I'm just going madly off here because I want to futuristically imagine a company like Netflix or Amazon or whatever, maybe coming to us and say, hey, how could we do this? We'd say, look, let's get or Neuralink or whatever. Let's get a lot of data from millions of people, and let's figure out the thought patterns, the cognitive patterns that we can support with technology that will facilitate sleep onset, to do a number of things, to chop up and the kind of thinking that interferes with sleep, I call this counter insomnolence. So insomnolence is what keeps you awake, that imagining that it's Christmas next day, or I'm getting married. Yeah, it's gonna be great. Or the negative side of that. So counter insomnolence is keeping you awake. Is interfering with what keeps you awake, and the pro-somnolence. So what I think is, if we can equip people with these concepts, then they can look at technology and it can help sleep onset, and that we can change our attitudes towards anything. The whole mindfulness thing is great. Mindfulness says, you've got all these stressors out there, but if you look at them with interest and curiosity, so now I've shifted. I had insomnia myself, and I shifted from this being a stressor to being something I'm curious about, and where we've got all this cortex here, so we can use it, and then things become a lot less threatening. That's the whole mindfulness thing, when we look at them with curiosity. So you look at the tech with curiosity, but not being obsessed with it, perhaps. And that's a long answer to your question. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, and I'll just in terms of practical things, use a tracker if you need to use it, if you find that it helps you. If you don't find that it helps you, if it's causing issues, don't use it. If you're using your technology, make sure that at night, make sure that you have a timer, if possible, to time the music or the lights, so that, like red light. I mean, we had
a discussion
about that.
Yep.
So, they made sure that there was a timer there, so you had complete darkness. It's better for you.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you need to look for tech that will allow some customization to your needs. I would also say, in terms of a lot of the existing apps out there, so we've spent a lot of time talking about futuristic
Yeah.
apps, where it's going. But what we do have now, or besides trackers, are things like sound, so music apps, sound apps. I think I've mentioned before, make sure that your hearing isn't affected.
Yeah. And there's a
Right?
timer as
There's-
well, right?
Yes. And then, in terms of other apps, you're talking about things like light therapy for circadian rhythms, or, to help delay or advance that if you need to. I mean, if you don't need to, that's even better. But if you do, then, which most people do, then that helps. So that's basically your sad lamps out there, right? So then you're talking about sleep apnea. So you have your CPAP machine and other technology that people will be developing over time. That oxygen meter, I called it an oxygen meter. Is it an Well, that tracker,
sensor that tracks, yeah.
the oxygen
Level.
oxygen sensor that tracks your oxygen levels. That might also be useful. And then in terms of your home, now we can actually program. Well, some people can program their temperature and to change it. So,
Internet of Things, basically.
yeah, Internet of Things, essentially. So, that can be used to start creating an atmosphere for you. So you've got now the external and the internal working for you. So those are just practical things that you can actually do to help you use tech
To
but
help
for
you.
you. Right.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for being with us, Luc, today. I've learned so much about the other side of, it's interesting because so far we've talked a lot about, sleep hygiene and all that. So looking at the lens on the other side from a cognitive science perspective and how we can control certain aspects of our own behavior to influence the quality of our sleep is very interesting. So I think we've learned a lot. So one thing I wanted to do, since I still have you with us, it's just a debunk. We do that on every episode. One thing I wanted to debunk, and I think that's going to be quite easy based on our conversation, is can technology, or is technology to fall asleep the same thing as, let's say, a meditation or a relaxation session you would do alone, based on certain techniques?
Well, what's the same? As soon as you make it different, it's different. But in terms of tapping into the mechanisms, I think technology can, increase the potential of, or actualize that potential. I'll give you an example. I've got a chair here that I find very comfortable with. Angie, I have how do you say a poof in English? To put a stool.
A stool.
Yes.
A footstool.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is technology, my friends. And that helps, and that could give me a much better in meditation. Some people swear by, let's be uncomfortable and meditate. I think to me that's whatever gets you through your meditation, man. But that's not for me.
So tech is just a tool. Yeah.
So the tech, I do believe, and I've started doing something which I use a metronome because for time there's research on breathing. I got into that because of my medical things recently. I've got a friend who's journalist, scientific journalist, just amazing brain that just reads everything. And he says, you gotta check out this resonance breathing stuff. So some of you out there listening to us, watching us will know about that. So I didn't go full on to the tech. It was expensive. I just got a metronome, and I do a count, which is I do a 4-10, inhale 4 with the metronome, free app actually, and then 6 out. I find that I've been meditating on and off since I was a teenager, and that is my tool of choice for a meditation. I've got Sam Harris's like $250 program, and Sam, I love your stuff. Your podcast is great. Your waking up thing I don't need your help for meditation. I don't need to sit and I don't need to watch a yoga thing to do yoga, but people like it, and that's great.
Yeah.
Individual differences. Me, I just need a little bit of stimulation. I'm out of here. So the metronome for me does it. And if this resonance breathing research is correct, that 4-6 rhythm, I mean, there are individual differences, but I placed my bet. I said, I'm not going to use this app. It's too complicated for me to figure out what my rhythm is. I'm just going to bet that I'm an average person and 4-6 is me. And whether that's true or not, it just works like a charm for me. And now with conditioning, I just hear that. Sometimes I'll do it in the kitchen. I'll be standing up, try not to have knives when I'm doing this, but if I'm feeling stressed or whatever, I just have my 4-6 going, and it just calms me. So that's, I think there's lots of simple things you can do that with tech that works for you. I mean, so many choices.
And I think too that where I think technology can help, I mean, when I say technology here, I'm going to be very specific about apps, the different kinds of apps that we have here. It does take a little bit of learning to know how to do these things properly. How do you breathe properly? And so, downloading a breathing app might help. Having someone read you a bedtime story on an app can help if that's your thing, right? There's also even the cognitive shuffle, which is essentially Luc's mobile app technique, but in app form, it's My Sleep button, right? So that technology helps you in doing the technique. Because when I first started doing this, because Luc told me, here, why don't you try this? I've been working on this technique. And I did it on myself. I had to think randomly about things. What am I going to think of? Plant, shoe, beach, car, and it took a little practice for me to do that. Meanwhile, his app does it for me. Yeah. So there's an ease to using an app that can help you to get into the practice of doing something. I think also apps are great for scheduling your day. So if you have, for instance, a notification, even just a notification on your phone, it's time now to start winding down your day. Right? Other apps that might be also helpful, that will help you helpful will be night mode. Mm-hmm. Flux. Okay, can we say that? Can we say it's Flux? Basically blue light filters, those are also very good for you in terms of helping you when you're working and you have to use tech at night or in the evening. Yeah. So that's another aspect of it. But okay, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys. But essentially, that's it.
The technology to fall asleep. Yeah. We got another question about that. But he wanted to. I think Jeremiah wanted to let our viewers go to sleep now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're done. Yeah. We've been talking about this a lot in a kind of abstract way, but I hope that there was also some practical things that people can get.
No, most definitely. So to recap all that, yes, it is a great tool. It has to be used as a tool. So let's use that as a tool. It does not replace relaxation or meditation. It's more of a facilitator. And a lot of people will find it hard at the beginning to meditate by themselves anyway. So that's going to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the supports, I think, there's some really great software to help you meditate. Like I said, the metronome for me does it. But if somebody can do it without the technology, then all the power to them. That's the way I used to do it.
Great for them. So last thing I wanted to ask is, Janith, do you have any questions from the audience?
We have 3 questions. The first one comes from Jay. Do you think technology can get to a point where we can cure sleep disorders?
We kind of talked about it. Yes. I mean, not all of them. So the question was, Jay said, are we going to get to a point where you think technology will be able to cure sleep disorders? And I'm going to throw a wild guess there. Probably not everything, but a lot of things out there, depending on what future means. Is future 5 years or 100 years, right? But I think
the future is friendly, I think, to quote somebody.
Tell us. Clarinet.
Personally, I'd say, future's unpredictable. We might get hit by a meteor, but the trends are very promising. But also the brain is extremely complex. So I wouldn't get overly optimistic that it's for tomorrow, but you never know what breakthrough is going to come. I come back to saying technology without science is not going to be that helpful. So it's basically, this hinges on cognitive neuroscience. Mostly, but other disciplines as well. But remember, cognitive science is very interdisciplinary. So if we can understand, like in the case of nightmares, if you can understand the brain centers that are involved in nightmares, and we are getting some understanding of that, then sure, like we may be able to, through stimulation, and they're looking at that right now, brain, electric and magnetic stimulation of the brain. It was unthinkable before, and now it's looking like it's possible. So if this paper that we're writing is going to be available for free, it's going to be open access, assuming that, by the way, it's not accepted yet. It's not even submitted yet. But it will, and we will write, one way or another, we'll get the information out, and we're going to create infographics, etc. So I'd encourage viewers to maybe put that in their agenda to look for that in 2 to 4 months or however long it takes, because it's really exciting. You can skip all the theory if you're not interested in that. But writing that section 14 in this paper about the wearable applications, we haven't really talked about it, but all the all the things you could do today, and things at different, depending on how science goes, you could do. Anybody who's into tech and brain and cognitive science stuff and brain science, like this. This is a starting point. Basically, we're trying to press a reset, saying, look at the science differently from this perspective that we call integrative, integrating different aspects of the brain and different sciences. And it's also design. You notice we're trying to reverse engineer. That's what AI does when it's theoretical core, when it's at its best. So if you're fascinated by that kind of stuff, then we're trying to express that and point forward. And then, of course, it's a process. We just put it out there, and we want people to criticize it and suggest better things and where could this go. So it's and it's also, we've written this as an invitation to wearables researchers to look at, to say, look, if you're in a sleep space, look at this very integrative thing, and then let your imagination go crazy about what we can do. So we've put, pages of proposals, but, people reading that will have other ideas. And of course, we want these tested. This is not about saying this is the gospel. Science is hypothetical. We've got 7 postulates. Well, we know one of them is not going to get debunked, but others, they might. So it's a theory. So
that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. So basically the answer to the question is, we're hopeful that it will help. But as Luc said, human beings are complex, and there are always complexity means that it's never straightforward. It's never simple. So working towards a future, we can hope to expand our knowledge and to create technology that will be helpful. Will we ever eliminate issues? I don't know. But definitely make things livable, yes. And then there are other things too that you have to remember. Some things are not based on tech. Some things are based on culture. Yeah. True. Decisions that we make in terms of our lifestyles. This is not tech. So if you're supposed to wake up for your child who's a teenager who has a delayed sleep phase, and they have to wake up at 6 o'clock to get to school at ever earlier start times, that is a political issue. It's a societal
dictates a lot of these
issue. Yeah. And unless those constraints are modified in some way, then you're always going to have an issue. Right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thanks to both of you, because you're shifting culture by doing this podcast series. So thank you very much.
We'll see, depend on the reception, but I think there's pros in that. And even, people are becoming the level of understanding of what pressure comes from our society. I say that to so many people. I've never seen or expected a society to be so rich in information, general quality of life, while suffering from depression like we do, suffering from so many things that you wouldn't expect. People are being depressed with an iPhone in their hand, a roof over their head, and their belly full. So there's a lot of things, like you said, that are way more complex than what we think they are. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
If I may add just something briefly, is that, because it's really, I should have said this when you're asking about the technology. Let's go back to the Stoics and the ancient Buddhists and what they're doing. They had They had a toolkit with no information technology. Everything so much that was needed to be able to deal with challenges of today were there in the past.
Yeah.
So let's not throw that out.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And that's why also history is so fascinating. We still learn so much from previous cultures and all. So, Jenny, what are the other questions?
We have another question from Nero. Is it bad for my baby or child to become dependent on falling asleep to white or brown noise?
Oh, Cheryl or Luc, I will not even. So the question is about, is it bad for my child that I get him used to fall asleep with white or brown noise? I will let you guys answer. And I don't know. I'm not a physician either. I wouldn't even dare to say anything about that.
Yeah.
I don't mind taking it on, but Cheryl, you've got to.
Well, I mean, like I've said before, hearing issues with white noise, especially, right? That might be something to consider. You don't want I think one of the issues here is that you want to make sure that your child or your baby's ears are protected. So consider the impact of white noise on
The levels,
prolonged listening to white noise. That's an issue. So maybe look into that. I would say definitely look into that. And again, Luc and I are researchers. We have PhDs. We're not MDs. That was Myra, who is an MD. And so she would probably be able to give more of an authoritative stance on it. However, we can make suggestions. We can make suggestions too. Luc, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, all the caveats apply basically. Yeah. I think I'm going to say that I've had in my pipeline writing an article, which I haven't written, a blog post, and I don't know if I should do it on Somnolence Plus, I guess, and maybe on my Sleep Button or elsewhere, on this whole issue. And I'm not a pediatric person; I specialize in adults, so all the caveats. But I think that I'm a little bit concerned about the noise interfering with important cognitive processes and brain processes at night. So that is a pretty massive intervention. That's not necessarily evolutionarily typical, if you will, to have this generated in this manner. And it's kind of a pervasive thing. But you got to weigh the pros and cons. If there's ambient noise, it's interfering with sleep, or you got other problems. So I just say it's a question of the jury being out and talking to a sleep professional and looking at options.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes,
Thanks. I think
Okay.
that's and there's other options also that to consider, right? There's different techniques or tools that people can talk to their physician about to help if the given child actually have issues to fall asleep, right? If he doesn't have issues, then why using anything?
Yes, and there are
minimal tech. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there are consultants out there who do specialize in sleep training. And sleep training is something that I have mentioned in the past or that I will mention, that I know that in my own family, people have used, and my nephew went through that.
It's working well.
And it worked really well for him. So maybe look into that. Find a really good sleep trainer for infants.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question, Jenny, I think.
Yeah, last question. It's a bit more fun. It comes from William. With VR and AI being so prominent, what are your estimates in years for it to be possible for someday to live in another life in our dreams with the help of technology? Kind of like the Matrix.
Oh, that's so funny. So I'm going to shorten it, but basically someone, probably a gamer out there, say, could I eventually, using VR technology, prolong or leave or have better control of my dream? Everybody would love to say, we all have this dream where you're either flying or talking with your dog, or could I even at some point think of hope to get control over that and kind of leave my second life in my dream when I sleep? Wow.
A couple of answers there. We have in our orbit a researcher called Alexandre Demir, who is a dream expert, and we've co-authored paper together with Sid and Bastien. But so he'd have a better, a more grounded answer than me. But very hard is, I think, the bottom line to influence it. But in the future, it may, like the little things you may be able to trigger. And lucid dreaming is something that it is a real thing. So people have managed to develop those skills. So that's not the same thing as affecting the random things that happen. It just gives you more agency in the dreams that you are having. And there are techniques. So yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm looking at what's happening. I'm an optimist for the ability to influence. It's not about control. It's about influencing.
So video game industry next level, huh? That would be something.
Right. Yeah. And the cool thing about lucid dreaming is, like you said, Luc, you can actually learn how to do that. And it's actually used as part of the treatment for nightmare disorders. So if you have chronic nightmares, really bad dreams, then you can actually use lucid dreaming as a technique. They teach it, and journaling too, actually. So, that's a interesting question, and
yeah,
it is a really interesting
I find it
question.
interesting. It's
Oh,
definitely.
one more thing, you were asking like about living. So maybe not in your dreams, but I remember coming across a YouTube channel. It was brought to me via a gamer friend of mine, and there's this guy. Big follower out there. There might even be some people who are watching who know who he is. But he actually built his own bedroom in, is it Minecraft? Wait, Minecraft?
That might be.
Yeah, he built his own bedroom there. He actually slept in that bedroom. Well, he put the goggles on and slept in that bedroom because apparently it helped him get over, was it sleep paralysis? Or
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
Or something like that, or night terrors.
Talking
one of
about
those.
being creative.
Yeah.
Right?
So that was really interesting. I heard about that person. I wonder. I think I have his YouTube channel somewhere, but yeah, maybe you're even watching.
That would be fun.
Give us a shout out. Okay. That's about it on my end in terms of answering that question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Luc, thank you again for being with us today. And to our audience, thank you so much for spending the last hour and a half with us. We really hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments below, and we'll do our best to either answer them on the next episode or offline. Thanks again for being with us, and see you on next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Wake Up Call podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel to make sure you don't miss any future episode. Thank you once again. Have an amazing week.